Welcome back to the Love and Relationships for the Modern Mystical Life podcast. This is where we weave together the practical and soulful parts of person-to-person connection. We get to explore here what's going on underneath the surface of all of our relationships so that we can create a new way of love with ourselves and with each other. Have you ever felt like something's just not working in your relationship? And then you're like, how do I fix this? I have to try harder. And what I've noticed with this perspective is that it has us treating our relationships like a machine, like it's something that is predictable. But a relationship isn't a machine, and it's definitely not predictable. It's a living system. And living systems don't respond to force or tools or quick fixes. They respond to conditions. If you've ever tried to do everything right, like communicate better, try harder, read all the self-help books, but the relationship stays exactly the same, that's not you doing something wrong. That's what happens when you apply the wrong framework to your relationship. So when we try harder, this is often the worst thing you can do for a struggling relationship because it seems to it creates more tension. It hits on the wounds more. It repeats the pattern because we're focused on what's not working. We pour in more effort, but this doesn't change the conditions. So I came to this perspective because my previous career was in forestry. And I spent years reading how ecosystems work, how the condition of the soil impacts the growth of the cedar tree or the Douglas fir tree, how the thickness of the canopy of the trees impact what's growing in the undergrowth, what shrubs are growing, what mosses are growing. And in an ecosystem, every species is a vital part of that relationship. And in order for that ecosystem to be healthy, each species needs to show up exactly as itself. And so when we lose sight of who we are in a relationship, when we're overly focused on the person or the relationship dynamic, we try to fix, right? We adapt, we contort, we shrink, we try harder. We go into what pop psychology calls codependency. But see, here's the thing, is that we're not actually meant to live separately from one another. We're meant to discover how to grow and thrive in relationship to each other. This is what is called interdependence. And interdependence means that each person needs to be themselves. Messiness, past traumas, past beliefs, current desire, current love, current communication, all the messiness of what it is to be human, so that we can learn how to dance and evolve together. And sometimes this is where it feels sticky and tricky because there's this desire in human nature that we want to avoid pain at all costs. We want to be perfect, right? So much as if you ever practiced yoga and you're like, oh, I'm not doing this posture properly. It's not about doing it properly or perfectly. It's about practicing. And so this is what relationships are, practicing. And this is why when we come to our relationship with mess, being imperfect and being vulnerable and truly who we are, while being honest and responsible in our communication, this is where we get to evolve. So in this metaphor of the forest that I'm using, I remember my very first botany class where this just hit me why disturbance or tension or crisis is so important. And we were learning about the common salmonberry. So the salmonberry grows here in British Columbia, everywhere. It's everywhere. It's a very common shrub. But we were standing under this very dense canopy of Douglas fir, of Western red cedar. And I remember my teacher was pointing at this seemingly barren ground, right? It just had like needles on the floor, on the forest floor. Perhaps there were some mosses, but nothing else was really growing. And our teacher said, underneath the soil are the salmonberry seeds, because there were a few salmonberries coming up. And he said that the salmonberry seed can lay in dormancy for upwards of 20 years, waiting for the right conditions to grow. And what it's waiting for is a disturbance, a tension, a crisis from the top canopy, for something to come through and open the canopy up, whether it's a windstorm, whether it's a limb falling off of one of the trees, to allow the sunlight to reach through a gap in the canopy to hit the floor. And what that does is then it warms the soil. And that's the signal to the salmonberry seed that now it's time to grow. So this is what we're doing whenever we come into our relationships not perfect. Whenever there's some type of tension, it's actually an opportunity where the right conditions can reveal themselves about what the relationship needs, where we can begin to warm up and open up to one another into deeper levels of communication, into deeper levels of vulnerability and honesty and responsibility, so that we can grow together in interdependence. Because crisis, messiness, breakdowns aren't the enemy of growth. They're actually what is exactly required. We want the light to come in, right? The Leonard Cohen lyric. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. This is what is true for relationships. So what's important to note in this is that this disturbance or crisis often happens because we are all individuals, unique little individuals bumping into each other, living and growing and changing together. But there's an expectation that we have that everyone just stays the same. The person we married 20 years ago is still the person they are 20 years later. It's not true. Everyone around you, yourself included, is in constant evolution. And so then what happens if we don't see that or aren't curious to that, we kind of freeze them into an old version. And what this does is it cuts us off from the natural cycles and seasons of growth and expansion. So we go back to our forest. Everything is undergoing this cycle of growth and expansion, of stillness, of rooting, of changing. And there's sometimes like the awkward growth where there's newness coming through and it's tender. So we as people, we go through these cycles as well. We go through different cycles of growth, of different cycles of who we are as people. And women tend to have more obvious cycles than men because of our 28-ish days of hormonal rhythms, but men go through them too. They have different 24-hour hormonal rhythms. But when we don't talk about this or acknowledge this, when we pretend we're the same person we were 6 months ago, when we want the person in front of us to be the same, we start to take it out on each other. And these unexpressed seasons become unspoken resentment within us. And so the forest, again, is such a perfect metaphor for this, because every single species in the forest has different needs and requirements for growth and has different growth cycles. The cedar tree doesn't need what the salmonberry needs. The fern doesn't grow on the same timeline as the Douglas fir. And this is true for people too. You and your partner, you and your friend, you and your child, you're all different species within the same ecosystem, but you have different needs, you're in different seasons, and you have different conditions that you might need at different times for thriving. And so the question is never what's wrong with the relationship. The question is, what are the conditions that are here right now? And what shifts need to happen so that we can all thrive together? And this requires, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, this requires radical curiosity, compassion, and honest and responsible communication. These 3 C's. And they're with self and other. And so this week, instead of asking what's wrong with the relationship, if you think of a relationship and you're like, oh, I need to say this thing, or, oh, I don't like this thing that's happening, or this feels weird for me, what's happening right now, and you're keeping that to yourself, it's not about what's wrong. It's about what are the conditions here and what can I do to shift these conditions. You can also ask yourself, what season am I in? What am I needing right now? And if you're thinking about another person, you can get curious. I wonder what season they're in and what they're needing right now. So the first step is just really let yourself notice this. Create this curiosity. I wonder what's happening here. You don't have to create any change yet unless you feel inspired to. However, often what I've noticed with myself and my clients, when we can just get curious about what's going on instead of believing that we know what's going on, that in itself can create huge change. So let yourself get curious. See if you can adopt this idea of curiosity, this posture of curiosity about what's going on with yourself and in the world. Thank you so much for listening. If you have a question or something you'd like to share, there is a link to SpeakPipe in the description. You can send me a message, a voice message, and then I will gather questions and have a further episode where I answer your question. Have the most beautiful day.